directed his energies in the courts as the defense attorney for the Freedom Riders, as well as other groups interested in the movement in the South. He also represented CORE in the historic 1963 March on Washington, and after serving for 3 years as its chairman, he is now the national director. I would like to remind you that following Mr. McKissick's address, there will once again be a coffee hour, this time upstairs in the Women's Lounge. This will take place at approximately 1 o'clock and run till just before 2. And now, once again, it's my great pleasure to welcome Mr. Floyd McKissick.
That was pure water. It's a pleasure to be here, and we apologize for being late. We don't control the airlines, and neither do we control the highways. And that is the reason for our being late. I have been asked to speak to you today on Black Power and the road ahead, which I'll attempt to do, and we understand that some students have to make a 1 o'clock class. First of all, there's much confusion in the country today because of two words, black and the other is power. You hear comments that the civil rights movement is split. You hear comments that the civil rights movement is dead. You hear comments that there's utter confusion. Now let us analyze these issues that are raised today and have an open mind. First of all, the basic belief that the civil rights movement is split is not true. And somebody says at this moment, aren't there some people meeting to issue a statement condemning black power and your organization? And I say, yes, I have heard of such a meeting. But the civil rights movement died with the Mammoth March on Washington. That was the civil rights movement. That was its climax. It brought together black and white from all over the nation who united around a common cause. And that common cause was integration. Primarily, that struggle during the past 10 years has benefited only those black people in society who were mobile, who could take advantage of integration, those who were educated. And by and large, the black masses stood on the side, watched and looked. They watched us open Howard Johnson, and they had no money to eat at Howard Johnson's. They watched us open the Holiday Inns, and they had no money to eat at Holiday Inns. And they watched the historic March on Washington. And they saw that integration did bring about a measure of success. And the measure of success benefited what the black writers call, like John Killens and Langston Hughes, the talented tenth. And the civil rights struggle was primarily for the benefit of the talented tenth. And very few of the masses, the other 90%, did not profit by the struggle of the past years. We created the tokenism brigade. It became fashionable for every business to have a black woman sitting at a desk answering the phone, or a black man hired as a public relations officer or a consultant, and they were given a prominent desk. Every firm in the country, it was popular, it was the thing, it was the fad. And everybody got on the bandwagon. And you could walk in now and you see these receptionists and you'll see these one or two people who form the tokenism brigade. But by and large, the tokenism brigade still has not benefited the black masses. And so when you hear the cry that the movement is split, the civil rights movement died for the benefit of those who don't know with the March on Washington. And after that, we began to hear the rumblings of the black masses who were waiting for guidance, who were waiting for leadership. And they are now articulating what they mean. The objectives, they signal the cry of the black revolution. And the objective of the black revolution, the objectives of the black revolution are not the same as the civil rights movement. By and large, many of the tactics that were employed during the civil rights struggle will be employed to aid the masses in what they seek. Everybody seems to wonder about the two words black power. Well, the words black power, and most black people in this audience know, have been in the lingo, been talked about in the blues, been talked about in the spiritual of black people for a long time. In other words, those two words were in the common domain of black people, and particularly the black masses. And these words came forth. And in order to discuss what we mean by black power, there must be first some interpretation. And if you don't seek an interpretation at the outset, then any conclusion that you draw is erroneous. And this, by and large, is what has been occurring throughout the nation. Now, what do the masses mean when they say black power? The masses simply mean that we are going to control our own show. We are going to call our own shots. We are going to set our own goals, and we are going to determine how we are going to accomplish these goals and determine our own priorities. And of these goals, we have one, the 6 points of black power. One, we've got to have some political power. Two, we must have economic power. Three, we must have an improved self-image of ourselves. Too long has history decided not to put anything in the books about black people, with the exception that they were happy in slavery and they supported their masters while their masters fought for a war to keep them in slavery. We have never been told of the more than 200 slave insurrections where black people have never wanted to be slaves. I want to leave that point and go on down. Point 4 is that we want to develop militant, young, dynamic, and dedicated leadership that cannot be bought or sold. Goal 5. We want to see that the federal laws are enforced, comma, police brutality erased, comma, and the abolishment of police state tactics. And 6 and last, that black people have got to unite to form a massive consumer bloc to strike throughout this nation in unison and simultaneously against any big concern that controls his livelihood, controls his jobs, that controls franchises to all outlets, to automobiles, and to the other commodities in this society. We believe that if somebody is going to advertise toothpaste on the television, instead of having a little white girl brushing his teeth all the time with that toothbrush, they got to have a little black girl. If a man sells an automobile, too long has the time come that only white people drive cars by the TV. That if you're going to sell a car in the black community, you better advertise it with a black man driving it. If you're going to sell bread, you better show the society that black people too eat bread. These are the racisms which are in our society every day, which we fail to recognize, but which infuriate and hurt immensely psychologically and otherwise black people. And one day we would like to see a Miss America contest where a black girl can walk down that boardwalk and be crowned Miss America with her hair being natural. So when people start talking about black power, just first find out what we mean before you start stamping something that somebody else tells you to stamp, because they control the papers and they control the radio stations and the TV stations and everything else. And it makes no difference to us who goes in a league and decides to make a statement. The Congress of Racial Equality will not change its direction. And our direction is for black power as we have defined it. Now, what do we mean when we talk about getting political power? What do we mean when we talk about economic power? Let's just give you some quick examples. One, we mean when we talk about economic power that where the black people live, and in all over this country, the position is the same, rather north and south, they live in the ghetto. Now the 10% that has become mobile doesn't live in the ghetto. He's been able to move out, and he's living in the suburbs. But the revolution is concerned with 90%, and the civil rights movement was concerned with the 10%. So our direction is on the 10%. And what's going to happen in the ghetto? Because we live in the ghetto, we believe that we ought to own it, lock, stock, and barrel, and control it. Economically and politically. Because the basic facts of life, in which people have tried to deter the directions, have been to tell you to work on poverty. Well, man, if the poverty program is infested and racist ideas still exist, we don't have representation on the poverty boards. We don't have representation on the poverty boards. We don't have, so long as the society, the white people got all of the money and black people have none of the money, we're still at a loss. And when they tell you to go out and work for voter registration is noble, and we believe in voter registration. But where black people spend their money, you don't vote but about 4 times a year under the best circumstances when you're registered to vote. But every day you lay down that dollar, that's when you're really voting in this system. Where you spend that dollar is the most important thing of all. Because they can just get an electric mimeograph machine and run off the beautiful civil rights laws and pass them all out, and everybody can agree that this is what ought to be. But so long as that man has got that dollar hemmed up, he's got us trapped because he controls the economy. And we've got to get a proportionate share of the economics, and we've got to control our community. See, I don't think a lot of people have ever had the experience of living in a capitalistic society without capital. And we are the classic examples of it. So we got to talk about economics, and we got to talk about helping ourselves, and we've got to talk about buying up every little shop in that community to provide jobs. And I hear some brainy people have come up with a great big plan now to say that what we really need, the answer to the problem, is increased minimum wage laws. And I say, man, you cuckoo. And I say you cuckoo for the reason that every time, so long as we continue to be a racist society, every time you increase the minimum wage level, you aren't help solving this problem. You creating a problem for black people, because then those jobs become acceptable to white people, and the white people get them, and the black people have got no employment. Now, what have we accomplished during the past 10 years? What have we accomplished during the past 10 years? We got more segregated school districts in the United States today than we had in 1954 by the statistics of the United States government. How many people have we integrated into society? Approximately 10%, and they're catching hell meaning that status. A recent survey of bank employees showed that 800 bank employees were employed during a given period 4 years ago. 200 of them were Negroes, and all of the white people are now making more money and have been upgraded over and above all of the black people that were employed, save 8 whites. And the 8 whites ought to have been fired. Now this is what have we accomplished? The employment rate now in the United States is 3 times higher for black people than for white people. And these are the problems of the black masses that we are concerned with. No jobs, poor education. And right now, I think many times people really don't want to hear what we are saying, or they want to misinterpret what we are saying. For example, you've heard of the controversy raging in New York now, in Harlem, around the issue of Intermediate School 201. And the black parents who've organized to say, now they, first of all, you see, this is the thing about the masses. First of all, they're organized because they believe what the Supreme Court said in 1954, that all men, were created equal and there was only one educational system. So they said, since we have just built a $5 million school in Harlem here, on the east side of Harlem, let us integrate this school to provide for education for all of our kids. Let us have a first-rate school. But somehow or another, the word got around that we ain't going to force no white kid to go to this school in Harlem. And furthermore, we ain't going to bust no white kid in to no black school. It don't mean whether you're in New York or Louisiana. This ain't going to happen in New York. So then the parents, they didn't get angry. They said, okay, let us attempt to arrive at a second solution to the problem. He said, now, since all of the studies show that the most dangerous time in a ghetto kid's life is at the junior high school level, since black people need an image, a sense of identity, a sense of accomplishment, something to look up to, something to be respected, says, why not put a black principal at this school? And they said, that's racism in reverse. And then they said, no, we won't. And the parents insisted. They said, you know that of all the school principals that you've got in New York City, you got only one black principal, and you got 3 acting principals, and all 4 of them are women. And do you remember the Moynihan report that the government spent $500,000 to get? You remember that? They said that children that grow up where there's no father in the home creates the development of a matriarchal society, which is a bad development on the kids, and it ultimately leads to homosexuality in many cases. You remember that? You know what the statistics are for the criminal statistics for the United States and for the state of New York based upon juvenile delinquency. You know about the dope pushing and all of these things. You know where the arrest first starts. It's at the junior high school level. It says recognize these facts. And says You say that the Moynihan report said they need a fatherly image? Well, give us a black principal. And really what we want is a black man. And what we would prefer is that you go out and find him. Because even if you put a white man there with 3 PhD degrees, he can't be the saving grace for a black kid who needs to be inspired, or else he's going wrong. And they said, them niggas trying to take over the school system. And just 6 months earlier, they had a report out on the apathy of black parents about their children. So black people in Harlem and elsewhere have got to make a major assault in the area of education. And of course, I pose one major question. All of the products of the public school system live in Harlem and make Harlem, and that is what Harlem is today. Queer. If that's the kind of system that we got, and that's what it produces, is it not now time to question our methods of education? So quite often, people don't understand what we are talking about. But we are talking about very logic and basic things that people would care to listen. I want to go on to one other point. And when we talk about improved self-image, the image that you get from reading the history books about the black man is very, very tragic. We are condemned often. We are condemned for being ignorant and uneducated and unable to qualify for a job by the very ones who created the system by which and for which we are now condemned. And we seek to make these changes. Now the history books. I remember that I was 14 years old. I had been reading about General Custer and General Custer. And I was 14 years old before I found out that it was a red man, an Indian, who beat the living daylights out of General Custer. Right now in history books, they don't teach you about a black man named Toussaint Overture who defeated Napoleon. They care to tell you that Napoleon got defeated at Waterloo. But Napoleon also went way down to this island over here in Haiti, and a black man named Toussaint Overture cut him up a brand new one over there. Now, this is what I'm talking about. You read the history books, nobody ever tells you, and I dare say that anybody here probably has had a blood transfusion since World War II, and how was it created? A black man by the name of Dr. Charles Drew at Howard University gave us the pattern and everything for blood plasma that everybody uses. I suppose the next thing I hear that a white man did that. And they ask you at school, who were the greatest people in the world? George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, or Franklin D. Roosevelt? Don't ever put a black man in the equation. Then you come along and you will find that right now the very peanuts that we eat today and the very sweet potato that used to be called darkest food, nobody else would eat, black folks munched on peanuts. This is what it was. Nobody ate the peanut. Nobody ate the peanut, and nobody ate the sweet potato. And it was a black doctor named George Washington Carver at a black institution in Tuskegee, Alabama, that developed the peanut to commercial value, and now the white people making all the money off of it. The same thing with the sweet potato. But yet they try to teach us. They don't teach us about ourselves and our contributions, and I could name them. You read about Alexander Dumas or Pushkin, and they tell you that he was white. Well, let us correct these things. These were black people. The Queen of Sheba was a black woman. Cleopatra And now talking to a great professor who had something to do with the Dead Sea Scrolls, they said pretty soon they're going to come up with the theory that Jesus wasn't even white. That he was a little bit of something else. But he wasn't entirely white. And every time I go into church, I see pretty white Jesus up there. These are the kind of things that we get in a racist country and a racist society. You see, in fact, my people, let me tell you, the reason you don't understand and everybody's worrying about black power, this expression today, you know why? White people never had to worry about white power because they had all the power anyhow. So when we're talking about transfer of some of that power into the hands of black people, then they say, no, I ain't going to give you none. And this is actually what it amounts to. You see, we live in two worlds. We got a black world and a white world, whether you want to admit it or not, in spite of the 10%. We don't even think alike half the time. There's a black psyche and there's a white psyche. We've been conditioned to oppression. Just like one told me the other day, he came down here to interview me and says, I knew what he wanted me to say, so I said it. But I didn't tell him the truth. We build defenses because we know in order to survive, sometimes it's best to tell a lie. And we'll tell a lie. But we live in two separate worlds, the educational world, the institutions of religion, and the government itself. All have a part in developing that separation which exists. We integrate on one level that mobility of black people which can be absorbed, which make up that 10%. But the masses, we don't see. And one of the people was telling me the other day, what was needed is we need to destroy the ghetto. And I say, ha, ha, ha. You ain't gonna never destroy the ghetto. You ain't gonna never destroy the ghetto in the first place because you created it when the white people ran out. That's the reason you got the ghetto. Don't come talking about Negroes migrating here, and that's what creates the ghetto, all of them migrating from the South. You got the ghetto because the white people moved out and didn't want to live with the black people, and they automatically entered into a gentleman's agreement that this is where all the black folk gonna stay. And that's the reason they're there. One, people in the ghetto, contrary to public thinking, don't want the ghetto destroyed. They want to live there because this is the only area of basic freedom where they can get away from that white society after being boy all the time, all day long, and they come home and they are man at night. They've got their own institutions where they can get dignity, where they can get respect, where they can hold office, or where they can go to their church and be the head of the trustee board or the deacon and be looked up to and respected. In spite of the ghetto's faults, most black people would prefer to stay in the ghetto than to associate with white people. This is a simple, basic fact. They want to make the changes in the ghetto. They know that they aren't going to be absorbed in that part of that 10%. 10% can't even be absorbed. We aren't capable of that absorption. So how are we going to be capable of absorbing the other 90%? So alternatives have to be worked out. This is the reason they seek self-determination, to develop the alternatives that they seek. So we proceed upon a numerous false assumptions. Now, I could talk on about political power I could talk on about the enforcement of the laws, just like we passed 3 civil rights bills and ain't nobody enforcing them right today. I don't know what they tell you on the West Coast. This is the liberal West Coast where the John Birch Society is more numerous than any place else. But you know, they passed a voting rights bill, 2 voters' rights bill, a civil rights bill, and a Poverty Act, and conditions ain't changed for black folk yet. They aren't even seeing that black people get registered to vote in the South. You remember the Civil Rights Bill, which had the trigger provision that registrars would be sent to the South? Well, they sent them down in 1 or 2 places, but political deals were made, and the rest of the registrars have never gone down there to get black people registered yet. And daily we get letters that I want to send my kid to the school, but Mr. So-and-so in my community, who is a white man, is president of the bank, last week had so-and-so jailed because he tried to eat at the Roadhouse 3 miles from here. And he told him he was fired the next day. Mr. So-and-so told me that they were going to foreclose on my house if I sent my kid to school. Will you help me? Mr. So-and-so in X County had an accidental fire at his house because his kids went to the integrated school. I'm talking about some basic facts, man. I'm talking about facts that can hurt you when you get your mail every day. And instead of the attitude changing, the attitude has become one of a continuing circle and the same thing over and over again, and the same problems were supposed to have been destroyed or eliminated some 8 or 10 years ago. Black people can't send their kids to school in the United States of America today in the South. They just might as well as declare war upon that community for economic reprisals are forthcoming. I urge each and every one of the students here to think in terms of what role he can play in this struggle. I've heard a lot of people say that, where is, what role are white people going to play? What role can I play? Well, I don't know, some word got out somewhere that we didn't want white people in court. And I'm here to tell you that that's a lie. We never said that. These changes that we seek cannot be achieved in this society by black people alone or by white people alone. It's going to take every American, including the American Indian, the Spanish American, the Puerto Rican, the black man and the white man. All have got to participate in this struggle together. As I was talking to one of my friends who said that in San Francisco, the black people and the Japanese were working together on a common problem. It takes all people, and we need everybody to join in this struggle. Because sooner or later, you're going to get the effect of it. I had one good friend who was integrated. He was in the 10%, the tokenism brigade. He got integrated. The other day he came to see me and said, look, man, said, you still got a vacancy in the public relations department of Corps? I said, yeah, we still got a vacancy, but we ain't paying much money, you know. We real short on money. He said, well, look, I got this job over here with this, big integrated firm. I said, well, man, they're paying you well. He said, yeah, they're paying me $12,500. But says, just as I thought, sooner or later it had to happen. I said, what had to happen? He said, this guy who I thought was the best guy in the world. I said, Phil, yeah, the guy I was called the best guy in the world and everything. Said, other day he got angry and he called me one of them things. It all came out and said, I don't know how long I can take it. But if you're paying $100 a week, keep the door open, because I got to come back home, I believe. I know that the job ain't done. So when we talk about the role of the white person in this civil rights struggle, you going into the black revolution, I don't want to give you no illusion. There ain't no civil rights movement no more. Black people are going to control it, and they ought to control it. Because the only way that they can be free is that they must lead themselves. If a white people leaves a bunch of Negroes to be free, then they are controlled by white people in itself. They've got to do it. Not only that, we found out in the South that when the going got rough, there's a many a time the white kids could get back out and go back to society. But once we get in a struggle where our necks are involved, we can't back out. We can't paint ourselves white and escape. We in it. We've got to set the course of the revolution, because we can't escape because of our color. That doesn't mean that white people are not wanted. It means that everybody is needed. And the role that was played in the civil rights movement cannot be played in the revolution. It's a simple process of growth. This was what the movement was intended to bring about. It's the same thing as I used to see Norma Sharon, Barbara Stanwyck, and all of the old leading ladies play their leading roles on the screen in those days gone by. But now they play character actors, and they play supporting actors. And they do give Oscars for these roles also. But it takes all people to work together. And I thank God that when we look at CORE, and we need money, but when I look at CORE, I'm quite proud of the 40% of the white people who have constantly and continually remained within our ranks. And during this episode of our most perilous period, which we experienced, our membership has risen to a point that it has never before risen. We now have more than 100,000 members. And our mailing department estimates that it will exceed 100,000 by the time they get through cataloging the new memberships. So when I hear all this cry about black power, let me tell you something. It can't go back into the womb. It's out of here. It's a dialogue of black to black, black among black. And our friends understand it and know its meaning. We can vouch for our definition of what black power is, but for no one else can we vouch. So as the old saying going, our direction to black power, to working for the power for black people to bring about a society of total equality, is a goal dictated by the masses. It is a goal that we must follow. And we would be derelict in our duties if we did not follow that goal. And judging from our continual increase in membership, there is an old slogan that says, it must be something somewhere that we doing that's right. I thank you. Questions, I'll be happy.
Mr. McKissick will be glad to answer questions, except let's move them from out of this big group into our coffee hour, which will be up in the women's lounge. You're all cordially invited. We'll just take a slow walk up there. It'll be a little bit more relaxing than trying to scream them from the format for this afternoon will be a series of questions and answers. If you have a question that you'd like to ask, please stand up or scream it out. I'll repeat it for everyone into the microphone, and then we'll have Mr. McKissick respond to it. Now understand that we have two questions first. Go ahead, please.
I'm not too familiar with what is happening out here. I wish you would explain it a little clearer. Who is the new group, and what is the purpose of the boycott? My feelings, and I might say qualify my feelings because I don't know all of the situation here. I have been attempting to keep up with the Reagan forces and the Brown forces, and both of them are, of course, politicking, and neither one of them is saying too much, I think, that speaks to the ghetto. And I can understand the various attitudes. My strategy, however, would not be to waste the vote. My strategy, I think, would be to attempt to use that vote in the most intelligent way by choosing the most liberal of the two candidates. Your question is what now? Well, that's difficult to say what he will do if he is elected governor. That's Ronald Reagan. I don't know what he'll do if he's elected governor, because everybody says what he's going to do before he gets in, and most of them don't ever do it. We've elected some of the most liberal people in this country, and then after they got in a position, they didn't deliver. So I don't really think that, and I don't want to be caught in a position here, and I'm going to stay away from it, of endorsing any candidate, or by innuendo endorsing any candidate, because I think that's for the people of California to decide. And if they tell me that we have decided to go this way and they wanted my support, then I would support them. But so I'm not too sure that I'd have to look at Governor Brown's record, even though he's a Democrat, to see what he's doing. And then I'd have to see what Ronald Reagan is doing, and I'd have to find out just what the score is before I would commit myself.
Before we go on, I'd just like to introduce the other gentleman up here with us, is Mr. Lou Smith, who is the regional director for CORE. So he's also up here, and maybe he would comment also. Yeah, let's have some questions now. Sir.
I've discussed some leaders of the American community give some very impressive answers and ask just what it takes for me. It's not possible to get together and issue something as explicit as you have done today. Because while I can trust deliberate and good, sometimes they capitalize on these massive answers from prominent leaders in the community. It's not possible
I think you're absolutely right. We have attempted to define black power all along. I think we were the first organization that really talked about black power. We talked about this thing at the Durham Convention of CORE in 1965. And the theme of that convention was the Black Ghetto and Awakening Giant, right? That was the theme, and this is what we started to discuss. And we felt that there was a need to concern ourselves not with the 10%. We had been working with the 10%, but now it was time to move towards working with the masses. It's quite obvious that the masses are not happy, or else they wouldn't be in the streets, and particularly here. So we felt that we should direct our organization in that direction. And we started enunciating what we meant. But we first went to the people and got an idea from our community organizations, some of them who bear the name of core chapters, and as many community organizations who do not bear the name as core chapters, but are community organizations. And here we formulated the 6 points that we have enunciated as black power. And we enunciated this platform in March of this year. We enunciated this platform in March of this year. Now, these words, as I said, have been in the public domain. These 2 words have been in the public domain. I think Du Bois in 1898 talked in The Soul of Black Folks, talks about black power. He talks about this century would be the century of the color line. I think one of the last chapters in Paul Robeson's book is entitled Black Power in Our Spirituals. We sing the power in the blood. In our blues, we refer to these same things. All of the old blues singers, Lead Belly, Blind Man Lemon, and all Blind Man Jefferson, Memphis Slim, and all of the boys talk about this thing. It's in the masses, it's with the masses. And of course, Carmichael came out with our slogan when we were on the Meredith March. It says, "What do you want?" Freedom, and then some of the kids started hollering, "Black Power." And then it went from there to there and there to there. And so here we got this great big boogaboo here today. Now, I don't think I think it's wrong to expect all black people to think alike. I mean, all white people don't think alike. And I think that we should not expect all black people to think alike, and they're never going to think exactly alike. And I think we got to recognize that in our system, and we're quite proud to say that the Congress of Racial Equality is a totally independent, freewheeling organization that makes up its own mind, not by coercion or persuasion, and we're already broke. We would love to have some money, but we ain't going to change our position just to get a few dollars and sacrifice and mortgage our souls.
Yeah, back there with the UCLA or something written on the coat. Yeah.
Well, I think that the war in Vietnam is, of course, very much related to the total concept of what we are talking about when we talk about we living in a racist country. A lot of us don't want to admit it, but we got so much racism till we don't even recognize it anymore. We just accept these things. For example, in World War II, we had to have some barrack riots and disturbances to even get a chance to fight in the infantry. You know what I mean? On my way over here today, I saw a movie, The Battle of the Bulge. And did you know I didn't see a single black man in it, and I was up there in the Battle of the Bulge, and I know thousands of black men up there? That's the only reason I looked at the movie, to see that the role that the black men were going to play, because I was there, Daddy. And I got battle stars and a discharge to show where I was. You know what I mean? And we don't even show a black man as making a major contribution in this history that they fought in every war that we've had. And the black people have never produced a Benedict Arnold today. Now going back after having fought for the right to die. You see what I mean? We fought for the right to die. Then we come over here to this war. And now we find that that's about the only right that we really have got. That's where equality reigns forth, like the monsoons. Because we got more black men dying up there, We don't even know why we're over there in the first place. But we got more black men dying in Vietnam than we ought to have dying over there. The figure's up somewhere exceeding 18% now. And of course, we got a method of issuing statistics to make us look good, and we better be well aware of that. But the last statistics that were presented to me showed that of all of the combat units over there, of course, we only constitute 10% of the population, We can't get 10% of the economy, but they'll give us about 20% of the deaths over there in Vietnam. And the combat troops, that shows that we black people constitute 37% of the combat troops. Now, there's one other factor involved. We got a number of black men who volunteer, and it's tragic to say and to admit this. But do you know the reason the kids volunteer? They got a better chance to eat, to sleep, and even to live as a soldier than they have living as a civilian in this country. And that's the reason many of them do it. So when you talk about your war on poverty, that's one of the angles. I don't think the war on poverty is going to ever solve the problems in this country. I don't care how many $1 million you throw in a rat hole. If it's a rat hole, the rats will get it. And they're too tied to, they got another bureaucracy, got their bureaucracy. They spend more money on useless projects. All you got to do is get a project up to be funded that's going to prove that it ain't going to do nothing, and it ain't going to attack the system, and you can get it funded. You get a project up to really do something like to spread literacy throughout the United States, the program that Farmer had devised and developed. Lou played a part in it, and we played a part, and we developed that program, and we couldn't get that program funded. It's all tied up in political maneuvers and whatnot. I don't know. I noticed you had a real nice parade out here. Shriver came out here and had a real nice parade, and I suppose that accomplished something. It accomplished a parade. Now, what was the part? I didn't answer all of his questions. What was the other part he was asking? Well, I think, first of all, we know who's fighting that war over there. I think it's really what we engaged in is neo-colonialism. It would be the modern definition of it. I think that's a civil war over there, and I think we really ought to get out. We've urged the president 2 or 3 times of this matter, and when we wanted to have a vote on it, that is at the time they had the White House conference, a conference they call the White House conference, and none of us got near the White House. But nevertheless, we expressed our views at this conference. And when we got ready to have a vote on the issue as it was posed, all of the folks who worked for the government, were in the room, and they voted for the government. So the people never had a chance to express themselves at that White House conference. But I think that it's all tied up. The problems, you see, President Johnson, or any president that's elected president of the United States is elected president of the world. He ain't no president of the United States no more. He's president of the world. And he really calls the shots. I think when they talk about they can't spend money over here on programs to help people, and we can spend that kind of money over there the other day that we spent in Vietnam. We got the statistics the other day, and it cost somewhere like $350,000 for every Viet Cong that we've killed. And that's ridiculous.
Yeah, right back there. Can you hear that? All right, you got it.
Well, if you once join the army and you decide to go on over there, you're gonna have to fight. Huh? Say what now? Or if you drafted. Of course, that's a question that you're going to have to make up your mind yourself as to what you are going to do. Now, the Congress of Racial Equality is supporting 3 kids who decided that they would not fight this war because it was an immoral war. And for other constitutional reasons, very valid constitutional reasons, regarding the elections, the ratification, the Geneva Agreements, and etc. And a beautiful legal case is being prepared, and we are defending these 3 people. Most of them are in New York City area. And of course, what you've got to do is to make up your mind what you want to do, and that's a decision that nobody can really make for you. It's an individual decision. And after you make that decision, then the action can flow therefrom. Now, Donald Duncan, I see back in the back of the room, you remember Donald Duncan who wrote that article for Ramparts magazine, It's a Lie? He can tell you about Vietnam very well. And we've been over that way together, in fact.
Okay, yeah, way back there.
Well, I think I've seen a number of tutorial programs. I'm not specifically acquainted with the ones here, although I've heard about them, you know. But I don't know the actual functioning and the detail, or how committed the people are to teaching, if they're trying to bring up levels or teach specific skills, or if it's an extension of the old tutorial system where the people are going there to save their souls rather than to try to save the kids' souls that they're teaching now. I think you got to look at the commitment of the people involved. For instance, I know of 2 successful poverty programs who are successful, who have people who have successful poverty programs in spite of the OEO office. They just made it that way because they were core people and they decided that they're going to make this thing right, and they have done it in spite of everything else. And I think these programs have, I think there's a tendency of the black masses to distrust the government and government programs because it always has ended up with certain people getting money and control of them, patronage, and it gets into the same old infested politics that have been with us for ages. And they seem to mistrust it. They prefer really private financing projects where you do have the commitment of teachers to really go along with a program. Now, I do know of a tutorial program that is under the poverty program that is successful too, but I think they have to be evaluated individually rather than to draw a general conclusion on the tutorial programs. I think there's some darn good. I saw one tutorial program which were preparing kids to go to the integrated schools, which really brought them up over a period of a summer, and all the kids ended up leading all of the classes. But they had some real dedicated people who poured their hearts and souls day and night and minds to get these kids in position.
Yeah, right here in this track.
Well, first of all, let me comment before I answer the question. What you're talking about now is some mixed up people who thought that it was still a civil rights movement, and they found out that it was a black revolution, as we tried to explain today. And they've heard black power, and black power has, with all of the other forces in societies anyway, we got a wave of reaction setting in throughout the country. And let's say the reactions, a classic example is the defrocking of Adam Clayton Powell. You know, that was an example of reaction. You see, the tragic thing about that is Adam might have his faults, but he was the biggest thing that we had in Congress. And when they slapped down Adam, they slapped down the whole black people in this country, you know. and they didn't recognize that. Now the other wave of reaction which has come about, the election of Lester Maddox in Atlanta. A third wave of reaction is the failure of the Congress to pass the Civil Rights Bill, even though if it had been in pass, it wouldn't make much difference unless we start enforcing laws a whole lot better than we enforce those that are already on the book. And then you hear the cries of black power again, and the fear that arises in guilty people's, in a lot of guilty people's mind, I would say, because they know how they have used power, and they just scared in hell if we get it, we might use it the same way. So all of these things have risen. Well, I think, first of all, it was a tragic mistake, to my mind, for white people who have worked in the movement, who knew the mechanics of it, who had been to Mississippi and North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia and everything, to let one little newspaper item or two newspaper items really change their minds. So therefore, I question how committed these people were without getting their information firsthand. That's the first thing I'd say. I would say, secondly, that there were a lot of white people in the movement, or white liberals in the movement, who took the civil rights movement more of as a fad, just like the Beatles, you know, and some of these things come in, and all of a sudden the next greatest thing that we need to devote ourselves in to, you know, get rid of this frustration is the peace movement. So they left the civil rights movement for the peace movement, you see. So we divided forces along the way for various reasons. And brother, when you divide forces in this country, them folks, these reactionary folks can unite and they'll cut you a brand new one. And that is what is happening today. And I think that right now we better start trying to get our forces back together again. And we better recognize, however, that this is no longer a civil rights movement. It has become a black revolution. And when I say revolution, I'm talking in the terms of the same thing that we mean about Renaissance, the Renaissance movement, a rethinking of the direction, a recreation of ideas, and a new direction that's going forth, with those changes comparable to the changes that were accomplished by the Industrial Revolution. And I better define that, because somebody may go out and say I'm going to get some guns or something. This is the way we interpret things.
I think this is extremely important, and I get this question every day. And I think really what has happened, many people have sent checks to the civil rights movement, and I know some who even sent their sons and daughters to Mississippi, but they continue to live in the valley, you see, where there's been more bombings than in Macomb, Mississippi, and they keep their mouths shut out in the valley. And I think it's all down to how much of your fanny are you willing to put out on the line. Are you willing to confront your own bigoted neighbors in your own ghettos where you live? Because very frankly, until you are willing to do that kind of thing, you're not going to make it on a Central Avenue where, you know, it's pretty rough today. It's no longer just, you know, we shall overcome and marching down the street. I mean, people's frustration level is here, and people are willing to die for their freedom now. Give me liberty or give me death has caught on. And very frankly, I think first you're going to have to do some soul cleansing. No longer can you sit in the valley in your groups and hear the little racial jokes made or religious jokes made and keep your mouth shut. Are you going to open up to your own neighbors, to your own people? I have to do it on Central Avenue because we have all kinds of things coming at us every day. And are you willing to make that kind of commitment in your own community? Then I think we can get together. But in the past, I think Floyd, when we were working on the East Coast and restaurant integration, we found out that the majority of people who ate in those restaurants were northern liberals on their way to Florida who would send us a check to go and sit in the restaurant to take the seat away from them and get angry when they catch us sitting there. But they would go right through that white-only sign, and yet they called themselves civil rights supporters. So those days are just gone. And I mean, it's going to take a confrontation with your own, where the racism really is coming from, and then maybe we can unite and pull this country out of what she's in.
I'd like to say one other thing on that point, too. You know, if particularly you young people, I'm really disturbed sometimes when I hear young people who come up with, you know, truly bigoted ideas. And that's the reason I was questioning just, you know, our educational system just teach us to maintain the status quo. That's all you're doing. Teach you how to make money, how to make some living. Morals are maybe sometimes they're important, you know, as between white people, but never really important between black people. And I think our educational system perpetuates this. Now, we've got some ills in this society which affect black and white. But the only moral force, as I analyze the scene today, and I may be wrong, the only moral force that's left in this society around which liberals can organize is the black revolution. And if they don't get together on that, all the white liberals might as well go off and decide to live in frustration and utter suffer from neurosis for the rest of their natural lives.
And unfortunately, we'll have time for just about 2 more questions, as we have about 10 minutes left, or as many as 10 minutes will allow. Yeah, right there.
First of all, that depends upon where you are. I think if you are in a county like Bertie, North Carolina, where you got 65% of the population of black people, I think black people ought to go after the total control of that county. And my reasoning is thus. 1, the principles of our government have always stated the majority rules, and even in Robert's Rules of Order, we carry out that theory. There's nothing inherently wrong with an all-black government that's dedicated to the people, and there's nothing inherently wrong with an all-white government. Now, here's a gentleman here from Rhodesia, and there are black governments over Africa. We got the same problems in Rhodesia as we got over here as black people. And sometimes all white people are not alike, and I want to clear this up. And there are people that you can form coalitions with in some places. And where you are in a minority, then you form a coalition. But if you're in a majority, as in the instance that I gave, then I think we ought to go after the whole government. See, we found out that where we were in a majority, we made a deal one time that they would hire certain policemen. And when we looked around, they hired the worst policemen they could find from the black community, and they would beat on black people's heads just as bad as the white people. Because they were Uncle Toms, and I mean, this is a product of the system, you know. These are the kind of people they hire. And the whole thing is totally infested, and in order to get rid of that sickness, you got to have a new government. I mean, family ties and everything's all hemmed up in it. Lou Smith wanted to say something about that.
Yeah, directly on your question, even if we could get one person in city council who represented the views of that ghetto, at least that voice would be heard. You know, and they could even carry civil rights tactics in there. You know, they can filibuster too. The problem we're having now, we don't have anybody in government that represents the thought, the thinking, the feelings of ghettos. And if you just give me one that represents that 90% of black people, even if he is in a 20 majority, at least that voice will be heard. He has access to get a message over. And I can't help but believe it will have some effect on that total other 20. But it comes back to what we did in the past. You know, we selected Negro leadership for that black mass again. And hence, when the revolt broke out in L.A., none of the Negro leaders could even go into the revolt area because they really didn't lead the people. They were not a part. They were selected, and that's what happens to our politicians. And you give me just one person, give me a welfare mother on Central Avenue on city council, and we'll have some effect on that city council. Or a welfare guy, a guy who's unemployed. I want him making his voice heard there. But nobody's making that voice heard today. And even in that type of limited politics, at least we're getting the message over. Press is more responsive to a councilman.
Yeah.
Right. Well, yeah, we are working on our programs and our tactics now, but we don't intend to publicize a whole lot of things like we have done in the South. You know, in the civil rights movement, we used to publicize everything that we are going to do, you know, and we found out that maybe it might be best not to tell everybody what we're going to do well in advance. So we've been trying to stay away from a whole lot of press and a whole lot of speeches for about 2 months while we've been putting together plans. But I will tell you of one or two things that we've doing. We are developing a number of small businesses, shop control businesses within the ghettos. And particularly in Baltimore have we done this, and we've got a sweet potato cooperative developing Opus Lucas Louisiana started off with all black. Now we got 40 white people who wanted to join with us because they were catching the same thing. That middleman killing all the profits down there. So we have developed some cooperatives. We've organized a black labor union because we couldn't get the other labor unions to join and organize them because they couldn't make enough money off of them. They didn't see them as a profitable thing. So we organized people who were making 40 cents and 45 cents an hour. And now we got this Maryland Freedom Union, and that's in Baltimore, which was our target city. We've got about 6 contracts, and this has become an official bargaining agent for the ghetto. And this was developed, and we developed the leadership there to carry on the Maryland Freedom Union too, as point 4 of our program is concerned. We got some freedom schools going at point 5 where we're teaching some black history, African history. You know, tell them about these black men who were smelting iron over here and developing art forms, you know, and half of the things we got, Benjamin Banneker laid out the city of Washington, you know, all these things that are hidden. We're bringing this stuff out now, and so we're getting some positive results. We were in Baltimore all year long, and we've really made some magnificent accomplishments if I attempt to praise the organization myself. Well, I don't know whether there's talk of a FDP, there's talk of a Black Panther Party, and there's talk of a People's Party. I don't know. I think I've got some reservations about all of these parties predicated upon third-party histories in this country. And I think really politics is so tied to economics. And one of the things that they've been feeding us, you know, all along was just get registered and vote. Well, registering people without giving them some political education just ain't worth 2 cents. You got to tell them how to use a vote, or the same old system will come around and buy the votes, you know. So I think we got more to do. I think that economic strength, that's the key to it. I think we got to work for one of the things that we're working for, like getting on Wall Street.
That question you asked is kind of classic, because people constantly hit us with this voting bit. Well, just like California, what we say about that's Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck, and who cares who gets in? No, it doesn't make any difference. Very frankly, the masses of people are not that much interested in voting yet. They want a job, they want the cops off their head, and they want food. That's basic. You know, people don't give a damn about democracy until they get something in their bellies. And what has happened is a lot of people who are hung up on politics first move into ghettos and try to organize political organizations before they try to deal with the basic fact of whether the man's kid is eating. And that's where they falter right there. So we feel that politics are going to flow. They flow naturally as people start to move. But first you got to have the willingness to meet people at their level and then move up into the political arena. And every attempt I've seen made to organize something political out of ghettos has kind of fallen through. And it's fallen through because you don't meet the needs of the people first and let them grow politically. Right away we're talking about Brown and Reagan, and you know, people down there are talking about Eaton first and maybe their councilman second. And we're way up here at a governor level, a congressional level, and we leave the people behind. And that's why the leadership must come from the masses, because they know their needs, they know what's more important to them right now. And as yet I've heard very little rumblings in ghettos anywhere around this western region about who's running for office. People give less than a damn. I know I sold my first vote I ever cast for $2. And I still feel today I got more out of that $2 than I would have gotten voting like I felt.
This will be the last question.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that I haven't seen that statement. I've heard rumors of that statement. I have not been contacted by any of them, and I don't know what the content of that statement is going to be. And I really don't know the reasons for that statement. but there have been at least the phone calls have been ringing off and on the hook all day from all shades and colors of people telling us, go forward, don't change, you're right. And I think that that public sentiment that has really come in our favor as of late is a thing that has impressed me more than anything, and I think it has impressed everybody in the organization, and I suppose that Lou has been probably getting the same type of thing here, saying you're right, go forward, and the black masses support you, and that to me is the most important thing. Whatever they say about me can't be any worse than what has been said about me, and fortunately enough, I've been able to survive a few beatings and kickings and everything, and sticks and stones may hurt my bones, but words will never hurt me, and the Congress of Racial Equality is not going to change its policy. I don't care who issues a statement.
Okay, that's it. Why don't we thank Mr. McKissick?